The night Elena Moore opened the door to Ryan Hale, she didn't know she was about to shatter the silence that had protected her heart for 3 years. One invitation, one dinner, one lie that Victor Caldero told himself that he didn't care who came for his housekeeper would crumble before midnight. In a world where power is everything and emotion is weakness, a crime boss is about to learn that the most dangerous threat isn't the enemy at his gate. It's the jealousy burning in his chest when another man makes the woman he loves smile. If you're ready to witness a love that breaks every rule, stay with me until the very end. And don't forget, hit that like button and drop a comment telling me what city you're watching from. I want to see just how far this story travels across the world. The Caldero mansion stood like a fortress against the Los Angeles night, its iron gates and stone walls a testament to the empire Victor Caldero had built with blood and calculation. Security cameras tracked every shadow. Guards patrolled every corner. Nothing happened within these walls without Victor's knowledge, without his permission. Except tonight. Elena Moore moved through the kitchen with the practiced efficiency of someone who had learned to make herself invisible. At 28, she had perfected the art of existing in the spaces between notice, cleaning without disrupting, cooking without conversation, living without leaving a trace. Her dark hair was pulled back in a simple bun, her uniform pressed and spotless, her presence as unremarkable as the furniture she polished daily. That was exactly how she needed it to be. For 3 years, she had worked as Victor Caldero's live-in housekeeper, and for 3 years she had kept her secret locked so deep inside her chest that sometimes she forgot it was there. Sometimes late at night, when the mansion finally settled into silence, she could almost convince herself that she didn't love him, that her heart didn't skip when his footsteps echoed down the hallway, that she didn't memorize the way he took his coffee, the books he left half-read on his desk, the rare moments when his stone-cold expression cracked into something almost human. Almost. Elena wiped down the marble countertop, her movements methodical, her mind carefully blank. Victor was upstairs in his office, conducting business she never asked about with men whose names she never learned. That was the unspoken agreement. She maintained his home, he maintained the walls between them. The doorbell shattered the silence. Elena froze, her cloth suspended mid-wipe. It was nearly 10 o'clock. No one visited the Caldero mansion at 10 o'clock without an appointment, without clearance, without Victor's explicit approval. The security team would have called up to the office, would have verified the visitor, would have... The doorbell rang again, more insistent this time. Elena set down her cloth and smoothed her uniform, her pulse quickening for reasons she didn't want to examine. She crossed the expansive foyer, her footsteps echoing against the marble floor, and checked the security monitor mounted discreetly beside the door. Ryan Hale stood on the front steps, his hands in the pockets of his expensive suit, his expression unreadable in the harsh glare of the security lights. Victor's lieutenant. His most trusted enforcer. The man who handled the problems too delicate or too dangerous for anyone else. Elena's hand hesitated on the door handle. Ryan never came to the front door. He never came unannounced. Something was wrong, or something was about to be. She opened the door, keeping her expression neutral, professional. "Mr. Hale, Mr. Caldero didn't mention you were coming tonight." Ryan's smile was easy, disarming, nothing like the cold efficiency she'd witnessed on the rare occasions when their paths crossed in Victor's office. "That's because he doesn't know I'm here, Elena. I came to see you." The words hung in the air between them, impossible and somehow inevitable at the same time. "I don't understand," Elena said carefully, her training screaming at her to close the door, to call security, to maintain the boundaries that kept this world from swallowing her whole. "I'd like to take you to dinner." Ryan's voice was casual, but his eyes were sharp, calculating. "There's a restaurant downtown, quiet, excellent food. I thought you might enjoy a night away from all this." Elena's throat went dry. "Mr. Hale, I appreciate the invitation, but I don't think—" "Ryan," he interrupted gently. "Just Ryan. And before you say no, consider this. When was the last time you left this house for anything other than errands? When was the last time someone treated you like a person instead of a piece of furniture?" The observation cut deeper than it should have, because it was true. Elena existed in Victor's world like a ghost, necessary but unseen, present but unacknowledged. She had built her entire life around being invisible, and now Ryan Hale was asking her to step into the light. "I'm working," she said, but the protest sounded weak even to her own ears. "Victor won't miss you for a few hours." Ryan's smile widened slightly. "Trust me, Elena, one dinner, no expectations, no ulterior motives, just two people sharing a meal." Something in his tone suggested that wasn't entirely true, but Elena found herself nodding anyway, found herself saying, "Give me 10 minutes to change." She didn't know why she agreed. Maybe it was loneliness. Maybe it was the dangerous, reckless part of her that wondered what it would feel like to be wanted by someone who wasn't Victor Caldero. Maybe it was simpler than that. Maybe she was just tired of being invisible. Elena climbed the back stairs to her small room on the 3rd floor, her heart pounding with something that felt dangerously like rebellion. She changed out of her uniform and into a simple black dress she'd bought years ago and never worn, brushed out her hair, applied minimal makeup. When she looked in the mirror, she barely recognized herself. For the first time in 3 years, she looked like a woman instead of a housekeeper. The thought should have pleased her. Instead, it filled her with a cold dread she couldn't name. Victor Caldero stood at the window of his 2nd-floor office, watching the front drive with an intensity that bordered on obsession. From this vantage point, he could see everything: the security gates, the circular driveway, the fountain that Elena insisted on maintaining even though he'd told her a dozen times to let the groundskeepers handle it. He'd heard the doorbell, had seen Ryan's car pull up on the security feed he kept running on one of his monitors, had watched Elena open the door, watched them talk, watched her disappear back into the house while Ryan waited. Victor's jaw clenched so hard his teeth ached. Marcus, his head of security, stood by the door, waiting for instructions that Victor couldn't seem to formulate. "Sir, do you want me to—" "No." The word came out sharper than Victor intended. He forced his voice back to neutral, forced his expression into the cold mask that had served him for 20 years in this business. "Where are they going?" "Moretti's, downtown. Ryan made a reservation 3 hours ago." 3 hours. Ryan had planned this, had known he was going to come here, had known he was going to take Elena out, had known that Victor would be in his office conducting business and wouldn't interfere. Except Ryan didn't know everything. He didn't know that Victor had memorized the exact rhythm of Elena's footsteps on the stairs. Didn't know that Victor timed his late nights in the office to catch glimpses of her moving through the house in the early morning hours. Didn't know that every time Victor told himself she was just the housekeeper, just another employee, just another person in his carefully controlled world, he was lying. He'd been lying for 3 years. "Have them followed," Victor said, his voice flat, emotionless. "Discreetly. I want to know everywhere they go, everyone they talk to, how long they stay." Marcus hesitated. "Sir, with all due respect, Ryan is my lieutenant," Victor finished coldly, "which means he knows better than to make moves without my knowledge. Which means this isn't about business. Which means I want eyes on them. Are we clear?" "Crystal, sir." Marcus left, and Victor remained at the window, watching as Elena emerged from the house in a black dress that made his chest constrict with something he refused to name. She moved differently without her uniform, less careful, less contained, more like the woman he sometimes glimpsed when she thought no one was watching. Ryan opened the car door for her. Elena hesitated for just a moment, her eyes flickering up toward Victor's office window as if she could feel his gaze on her. Then she got in the car and Ryan closed the door behind her, and they drove away. Victor stood at the window long after the taillights disappeared through the security gate, his hands curled into fists at his sides, his breathing carefully controlled. He told himself this was about security, about maintaining control over his organization, about ensuring that Ryan wasn't using Elena to get to him, wasn't playing some angle Victor hadn't anticipated. He told himself it had nothing to do with the way his chest had tightened when he saw her smile at Ryan. Nothing to do with the sudden, violent urge to put his fist through the window and chase after them. Nothing to do with the fact that watching another man take Elena Moore to dinner felt like losing something he'd never allowed himself to claim. Victor Caldero had built an empire on control, on calculation, on the absolute certainty that emotion was weakness and weakness was death. He had eliminated every threat, buried every vulnerability, locked away every part of himself that could be used against him. But he hadn't counted on this. hadn't planned for the possibility that the greatest threat to his carefully constructed world would be a quiet housekeeper with dark eyes and a secret smile, walking out his door with another man. He pulled out his phone and dialed Marcus. I want updates every 15 minutes. And Marcus, make sure Ryan knows he's being watched. Sir, that will defeat the purpose of, I know what it will do. Victor's voice dropped to something cold and dangerous. Do it anyway. He ended the call and turned back to the window, staring out at the empty driveway, the silent fountain, the fortress that suddenly felt more like a prison. For the first time in 20 years, Victor Caldero didn't have control. And for the first time in 3 years, he was forced to admit why that terrified him. Moretti's occupied the top floor of a converted warehouse in downtown Los Angeles, all exposed brick and dim lighting and the kind of understated elegance that came with not needing to prove anything to anyone. Ryan had chosen well, private enough for conversation, public enough to be safe, expensive enough to make a statement. Elena sat across from him in a corner booth, the city lights spreading out below them like scattered diamonds, and tried to remember the last time she'd been anywhere this beautiful. The last time anyone had looked at her the way Ryan was looking at her now, like she was worth the attention, worth the effort, worth more than the sum of her usefulness. You're quiet, Ryan observed, swirling the wine in his glass. Having second thoughts? About dinner? No. Elena managed a small smile. About why you really asked me here? Maybe. Ryan laughed, and the sound was genuine, unguarded. Direct. I like that. Most people spend the entire evening dancing around what they actually want to say. I've had 3 years of practice not saying what I want to say, Elena replied before she could stop herself. I'm tired of it. Something shifted in Ryan's expression, a flicker of understanding that made Elena's stomach drop. He leaned forward slightly, his elbows on the table, his voice dropping to just above a whisper. Then let me be direct too. I didn't ask you to dinner because I'm interested in you romantically, Elena. I asked you to dinner because I've watched you for 3 years, and I've seen something that apparently no one else has bothered to notice. Elena's fingers tightened around her water glass. What's that? You're in love with Victor Caldero. The words hung between them like a grenade with the pin pulled. Elena opened her mouth to deny it, to laugh it off, to do what she'd been doing for 3 years, bury it so deep that even she could pretend it wasn't true. But she was tired, so tired of pretending. Yes, she whispered, and the admission felt like stepping off a cliff. I am. Ryan sat back, his expression unreadable. For a long moment he just studied her, and Elena forced herself to meet his gaze, forced herself not to look away from the truth she'd finally spoken out loud. Does he know? Ryan asked finally. No, and he can't. Ever. Elena's voice was firm despite the tremor running through her hands. I'm his housekeeper, Ryan. I'm nobody. I exist to maintain his home, to make his life easier, to be invisible. The day he finds out how I feel is the day I lose everything. You think he'd fire you? I think he'd look at me differently. I think he'd start seeing me when I've spent 3 years perfecting the art of not being seen. And I can't... Her voice cracked slightly. I can't survive that. I can't survive him looking at me with pity or discomfort or obligation. It's better this way, safer. Ryan reached across the table and covered her hand with his, the gesture friendly rather than romantic, grounding rather than presumptuous. Elena, I'm going to tell you something, and I need you to really hear me. Victor Caldero is a lot of things, ruthless, calculating, cold when he needs to be. But he's not blind, and he's not stupid. What are you saying? I'm saying maybe you're not as invisible as you think you are. Before Elena could respond, before she could process what Ryan was suggesting, a shadow fell across their table. She looked up, and her heart stopped. Victor Caldero stood beside their booth, his expression carved from stone, his eyes burning with something Elena had never seen before, something dark and dangerous and barely contained. Victor, Ryan's voice was calm, but Elena felt his hand tighten slightly on hers before he withdrew it. I didn't expect to see you here. Clearly. Victor's gaze flickered to Elena, and she felt the full weight of his attention like a physical force. Elena, I need to speak with you, privately. It wasn't a request. Elena's mouth went dry. She glanced at Ryan, who gave her a slight nod. Permission or encouragement, she wasn't sure which. She slid out of the booth on unsteady legs, her heart hammering against her ribs. Victor didn't touch her, didn't guide her, but she felt his presence like a magnetic force as he led her through the restaurant to a private alcove near the bar. The moment they were alone, the moment they were out of sight of the other diners, something in his composure cracked. "What are you doing here?" His voice was low, controlled, but Elena heard the edge beneath it, the barely leashed fury. "Having dinner." Elena lifted her chin, forcing herself to meet his eyes, even though everything in her screamed to look away. "Ryan invited me. I accepted. I didn't realize I needed your permission to have a personal life." "With my lieutenant?" Victor stepped closer, and Elena's back hit the wall. "You didn't think that was something I should know about?" "Why?" The word came out sharper than Elena intended, 3 years of buried emotion suddenly surging to the surface. "Why would it matter to you who I have dinner with?" "I'm your housekeeper, Victor. I clean your house and cook your meals and make sure your shirts are pressed. What I do on my own time is none of your business." "None of my—" Victor's jaw clenched. "You live in my house, Elena. You're under my protection. Everything you do is my business." "Your protection?" Elena laughed, and the sound was bitter, broken. "Is that what this is? You're worried about my safety? Or are you worried about something else?" "What's that supposed to mean?" Elena knew she should stop, knew she was crossing a line that couldn't be uncrossed, burning a bridge that kept her safe. But she was so tired of safe, so tired of invisible. "You followed me here," she said quietly. "You left whatever important business you were conducting to come to this restaurant and confront me about having dinner with Ryan. So either you think I'm a security risk, or you think Ryan is using me to get to you, or—" She paused, her heart in her throat. "Or this isn't about business at all." Victor's eyes flashed. "You don't know what you're talking about." "Don't I?" Elena took a shaky breath. 3 years, Victor. 3 years I've worked for you, and in all that time, have you once, even once, treated me like I mattered? Like I was anything more than a convenient ghost who keeps your life running smoothly?" "Elena, so forgive me if I accepted an invitation from someone who actually sees me, someone who treats me like a person instead of a piece of furniture. Because whatever you think this is, whatever you think gives you the right to show up here and interrogate me, it's not enough. I'm not one of your soldiers. I don't answer to you outside of that house." The silence that followed was deafening. Victor stared at her, and Elena watched something shift behind his eyes. Surprise, maybe, or recognition. For a moment, just a moment, the mask slipped, and she saw something raw and unguarded. Then he stepped back, and the wall came up again, and he was Victor Caldero, crime boss, untouchable and unreachable. "You're right," he said flatly. "Your personal life is none of my business. Enjoy your dinner, Elena." He turned and walked away, and Elena sagged against the wall, her legs suddenly unable to support her weight. She'd done it. She'd finally stood up to him, finally told him exactly what 3 years of silence had cost her. So why did it feel like she'd just made the biggest mistake of her life? Ryan appeared in the alcove a moment later, his expression concerned. "You okay?" "No?" Elena pressed her hands to her face, trying to steady her breathing. "I think I just quit my job without actually quitting." "Or," Ryan said gently, "you just told Victor Caldero the truth he's been running from for 3 years. Come on, let's get you home." "I don't want to go home." Elena's voice was small, defeated. "I don't want to face him. I don't want to pack my things and find a new job and start over somewhere else. I just want—" "What do you want, Elena?" The question was simple, but the answer was impossible, because what Elena wanted was the one thing she couldn't have, Victor Caldero's heart, given freely instead of locked away behind walls of power and control. She wanted him to love her the way she loved him. And after tonight, after everything she'd said, that possibility felt more distant than ever. Yamus. Victor sat in his car outside Moretti's, his hands gripping the steering wheel so hard his knuckles had gone white. He'd told Marcus to call off the surveillance, told him to make sure Ryan and Elena got home safely, but to give them privacy, told him a lot of things that made absolutely no sense, given the way his chest felt like it was being crushed in a vice. She was right. Every word Elena had said was right, and that made it so much worse. For 3 years, Victor had convinced himself that keeping her at a distance was protection. For her, for him, for the carefully balanced world he'd built. Loving someone in his line of work was a death sentence. It gave his enemies leverage, created vulnerabilities, turned strength into weakness. So he'd kept her invisible, kept her safe by keeping her separate, kept his feelings locked down so deep that he could almost pretend they didn't exist. Except they did exist. They'd existed since the day she'd walked into his office for the interview, nervous and determined and completely unaware that she'd just become the most dangerous thing in his life. Victor pulled out his phone and stared at the screen, Marcus's number highlighted. One call. One order. He could have Ryan pulled from the restaurant, could have Elena brought home, could reassert control over the situation before it spiraled any further. But Elena's words echoed in his mind. Someone who actually sees me. Someone who treats me like a person instead of a piece of furniture. Was that what he'd done? Reduced her to furniture? Made her feel so invisible that she'd jump at the first person who offered her attention? Victor closed his eyes, and for just a moment, he let himself imagine a different version of tonight, one where he'd been the one to knock on her door, the one to take her to dinner, the one to make her smile the way she'd smiled at Ryan, one where he'd chosen honesty over control. But that wasn't who he was. That wasn't who he could afford to be. Victor started the car and drove back to the mansion, the empty passenger seat beside him, a reminder of everything he'd chosen to sacrifice. He told himself it was for the best. He told himself Elena would be safer this way. He told himself that love was a luxury he couldn't afford. But when he walked into the mansion and climbed the stairs to his office, when he passed Elena's empty room and felt the absence of her like a physical ache, Victor Caldero admitted something he'd been denying for 3 years. He was lying to himself. And he was running out of time to decide if the truth was worth the risk. The drive back to the mansion felt longer than it should have. Elena sat in Ryan's passenger seat, watching the city lights blur past, her mind replaying every word of her confrontation with Victor on an endless loop. The weight of what she'd said, what she'd admitted, not to Victor directly, but close enough that the truth now hung between them like smoke, pressed down on her chest until breathing felt like work. Ryan didn't push her to talk. He simply drove, one hand on the wheel, his expression thoughtful in the dashboard's glow. When they finally pulled through the security gates, when the mansion loomed before them with its lit windows and stone facade, Elena felt her stomach twist into knots. "Thank you," she said quietly as Ryan put the car in park. "For dinner, for listening, for everything." Ryan turned to face her, and his smile was kind, understanding in a way that made Elena's throat tighten. "Elena, can I tell you something? Something I probably shouldn't say, but I'm going to anyway?" She nodded, not trusting her voice. Victor Caldero has spent 20 years building walls around himself. Iron walls, concrete walls, walls made of power and fear and absolute control. But tonight, watching him walk into that restaurant, seeing his face when he looked at you, Ryan paused, choosing his words carefully. "Those walls have cracks, and you're the one who put them there. That's not... He doesn't..." Elena struggled to find words that made sense. "You saw him, Ryan. He was angry, probably already planning how to fire me without causing a scene." "He wasn't angry, Elena. He was terrified." Ryan reached over and squeezed her hand briefly. "And men like Victor don't get terrified about employees. They get terrified about people they can't afford to lose." Before Elena could respond, before she could process what Ryan was suggesting, the front door of the mansion opened. Marcus stood in the doorway, his expression neutral, but his presence a clear message. Victor knew they were back. "I should go," Elena whispered. "Good luck." Ryan's voice was gentle. "And Elena, whatever happens next, don't back down. Don't make yourself invisible again. He needs to see you, really see you." Elena got out of the car on shaky legs, smoothed down her black dress, and walked toward the mansion. Marcus stepped aside to let her pass, his eyes carefully avoidant, and Elena knew with absolute certainty that everyone in this house was aware of what had happened tonight. In Victor's world, secrets didn't exist. Information was currency, and tonight's events had already been cataloged, analyzed, and filed away. The foyer was silent except for the tick of the grandfather clock near the stairs. Elena stood there for a moment, torn between fleeing to her room and doing something monumentally stupid, like marching up to Victor's office and demanding they finish the conversation they'd started. The decision was made for her. "Elena?" Victor's voice came from the top of the stairs, low and controlled. "My office. Now." Her heart kicked against her ribs. She climbed the stairs slowly, each step feeling like a choice she couldn't take back, and followed Victor down the hallway to his office. He held the door open for her, waited until she'd entered, then closed it behind them with a soft click that sounded unnervingly final. The office was exactly as she'd seen it 1,000 times before. Massive desk, leather chairs, floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the grounds, walls lined with books Victor actually read. But tonight, everything felt different, charged, like the air itself was waiting for something to break. Victor moved to the window, his back to her, his shoulders rigid with tension. "Did you enjoy your dinner?" The question was casual, but Elena heard the edge beneath it. "Is that really what you want to talk about?" "I want to understand." Victor turned to face her, and the expression on his face made Elena's breath catch. Gone was the cold mask, the untouchable crime boss. What remained was something raw and dangerous. "I want to understand what Ryan Hale offered you that was worth risking your position here, worth walking out that door with him when you have to know, that nothing in my world happens without consequences." "He offered me visibility," Elena said, forcing the words past the lump in her throat. "He looked at me like I was a person, like I mattered. That's all, Victor. That's everything." "You matter here. As what? Your housekeeper? The woman who makes sure your coffee is hot, and your house is clean, and your life runs smoothly?" Elena's voice cracked. "I've spent 3 years being so good at invisible that I forgot what it felt like to be seen. And tonight, for just a few hours, I remembered. So yes, I enjoyed my dinner. I enjoyed being treated like I was worth someone's time." Victor's jaw clenched. "You think you're invisible to me?" "I know I am." Elena fought to keep her voice steady. 3 years, Victor. In 3 years, do you know how many actual conversations we've had? Conversations that weren't about grocery lists or dry cleaning or whether you'd be home for dinner? Maybe 5, maybe. You look through me every single day, and I've accepted that because it's easier than admitting the truth." "What truth?" Victor's voice dropped to barely above a whisper. This was it. The cliff she'd been standing on since Ryan had spoken her secret out loud at dinner. Elena could step back, could retreat into safety and silence and the comfortable lies she'd been living, or she could jump. "That I'm in love with you," she said, and the words hung in the air like a confession and a condemnation all at once. "That I have been for 3 years. That every day I come to work and pretend my heart doesn't stop when you walk into a room. That I've built my entire life around being close to you while maintaining enough distance that you'd never know. That's the truth, Victor. That's what I've been hiding." The silence that followed felt endless. Victor stared at her, and Elena watched a dozen emotions flicker across his face. Shock, disbelief, something that might have been hope before it was crushed under something harder. "You don't know what you're saying," he finally said, but his voice lacked conviction. "I know exactly what I'm saying." Elena took a step toward him, her fear burning away under the weight of 3 years of silence. "I'm saying I love you. I'm saying Ryan didn't take me to dinner because he wants me. He took me to dinner because he knew I needed someone to talk to. Someone who wouldn't judge me for being foolish enough to fall for a man who's made it perfectly clear that love is a weakness he can't afford." "It is a weakness." Victor's voice turned harsh. "In my world, emotion is leverage. Caring about someone gives your enemies a target. Loving someone—" He stopped, his hands curling into fists at his sides. "Loving someone is a death sentence. For them and for you. So you do care." Elena heard the words come out of her mouth and couldn't believe her own audacity. "That's what this is really about, isn't it? Tonight wasn't about Ryan or security or maintaining control. You followed me to that restaurant because you cared that I was there with someone else." "I followed you because—" Victor started, then stopped. His composure cracked further, and Elena saw the war happening behind his eyes. "Because I can't. I won't let you put yourself in danger for something that can't happen." Can't or won't, Elena challenged. Because those are two very different things, Victor. Both. The word came out like a curse. Elena, you have no idea what you're asking for. The kind of life I live, the enemies I've made, the constant threat of violence and betrayal, that's not something you invite someone you care about into. That's not something you subject them to. You keep talking about what I don't know, what I can't understand. But you're wrong. Elena closed the distance between them until she was close enough to see the gold flecks in his dark eyes. I've lived in this house for 3 years. I've seen the security, the late-night meetings, the way you check your phone compulsively because you're always waiting for the next crisis. I've cleaned blood out of your shirts and pretended not to notice. I know exactly what your world is, Victor. And I'm still standing here telling you I love you. Victor's control shattered. He reached for her, his hands gripping her arms, not hard enough to hurt, but firm enough that Elena felt the tremor running through him. You can't love me. You can't. I won't allow it. That's not how love works, Elena whispered. You don't get to decide what I feel. You only get to decide what you do about it. For one breathless moment, Victor looked at her like he was drowning and she was air. His grip on her arms tightened, his eyes searching her face for something. Doubt, maybe, or fear, or some sign that this was temporary, that she'd come to her senses. Then he let her go and stepped back, and the wall came up again, and Elena felt the distance between them like a physical blow. Go to bed, Elena. His voice was flat, emotionless. We'll discuss your future here in the morning. The dismissal was clear, final. Elena stood there for a moment, her heart breaking in slow motion, then turned and walked to the door. Her hand was on the handle when Victor's voice stopped her. Elena. She turned back, hope flaring traitorously in her chest. Victor stood by the window, silhouetted against the city lights, his expression invisible in shadow. Ryan was right about one thing. You're not invisible. You never were. Then he turned away, ending the conversation, and Elena fled to her room before he could see the tears streaming down her face. She closed the door and leaned against it, sliding down to sit on the floor, her dress pooling around her. 3 years of careful control, 3 years of buried emotion, and she'd destroyed it all in one night. She'd spoken the truth, and the truth had accomplished nothing except confirming what she'd always known, that loving Victor Caldero was a one-way journey with no possibility of return. Elena pressed her hands to her face and let herself cry, mourning not just her job or her place in this house, but the fragile hope she'd been carrying that maybe, somehow, he felt the same way. She'd been wrong, and in the morning she'd pay the price for that mistake. But tonight, alone in her room with the truth finally spoken, Elena Moore allowed herself to grieve for the love that could never be. Victor stood at the window long after Elena left, staring out at nothing, his reflection ghostly in the glass. His hands were shaking, actually shaking, and he curled them into fists to stop the tremor. She loved him. Elena Moore, his quiet housekeeper who moved through his life like a gentle current, who knew how he took his coffee and which books he preferred, and when he needed silence instead of conversation, she loved him, and he'd sent her away. Victor poured himself 3 fingers of scotch and downed it in one burning swallow, then poured another. The alcohol did nothing to quiet the war raging in his head, the brutal calculus of risk versus reward that had governed every decision he'd made for 20 years. Loving Elena was dangerous. Admitting he loved her was suicide, because he did love her. Had loved her for longer than he wanted to admit, since those early days when she'd first started working for him, and he'd caught himself timing his mornings so he'd see her in the kitchen, making coffee with that small, private smile she wore when she thought no one was watching. He'd loved her when she'd started leaving books she thought he'd enjoy on his desk, never with a note, never with an expectation of acknowledgement. He'd loved her when he'd come home after particularly brutal meetings to find his favorite meal waiting, still warm, with a bottle of aspirin left discreetly beside the plate. He'd loved her through 1,000 small moments of care and attention, through her quiet presence that somehow made the fortress of his mansion feel less like a prison, through the way she existed in his space without demanding anything from him except the opportunity to make his life easier. And he'd kept that love locked away, buried under layers of necessity and survival instinct, because acknowledging it meant admitting vulnerability, meant creating a weakness his enemies could exploit, meant putting Elena in the crosshairs of every person who wanted to hurt him. Victor's phone buzzed. Marcus. Sir, perimeter is secure. No unusual activity. Do you need anything else tonight? No. Victor's voice came out rougher than he intended. Make sure Elena's room is monitored. If she tries to leave before morning, I want to know. Sir, Marcus paused. Permission to speak freely? Victor's jaw tightened. Go ahead. What happened tonight at the restaurant? What's happening now? This is above my pay grade, and I know that. But I've worked for you for 8 years, and I've never seen you lose your composure over anyone. If Elena matters to you, maybe it's time to stop pretending she doesn't. Your job is security, Marcus, not relationship advice. You're right, sir. But my job is also keeping you alive, and I can't do that if you're too distracted by what you're not saying to see threats you'd normally catch. Just something to consider. Marcus hung up, and Victor resisted the urge to throw his phone across the room. He didn't need Marcus to tell him he was compromised. He'd known that the moment he'd walked into Moretti's and seen Elena laughing with Ryan, seen her looking relaxed and happy, and so beautiful it had physically hurt. He'd known it when he'd confronted her in the alcove, and she'd looked him in the eye and called him out on every lie he'd been telling himself. He'd known it when she'd stood in his office and confessed her love with a courage that terrified him. Victor moved to his desk and opened the bottom drawer, pulling out a folder he'd kept hidden for 3 years. Inside were background checks, employment records, and a photograph of Elena from her interview. Nervous smile, determined eyes, completely unaware that she was about to walk into the most dangerous situation of her life. Not because of the criminal empire he ran, because of him. Because Victor Caldera was a man who destroyed everything he touched, who turned gold to ash, who had learned through brutal experience that love was a luxury that cost more than he could afford to pay. His phone buzzed again. This time it was Ryan. Victor answered without greeting. Explain. I assume you mean dinner. Ryan's voice was calm, measured. Elena needed someone to talk to. I offered, that's all. You knew what asking her to dinner would do. You knew I'd... Victor stopped, unwilling to finish the sentence. React? Ryan supplied. Yes, I knew. That was the point, Victor. You've been lying to yourself for 3 years about how you feel about that woman. I figured it was time someone forced the issue. You had no right. I had every right. Ryan's voice turned hard. I'm your lieutenant, which means my job is protecting you. And you know what the biggest threat to your safety is right now? Not rival organizations, not federal investigations, not any external enemy. It's you, Victor. It's the way you're tearing yourself apart trying to maintain control over something you lost control of years ago. Victor's hand tightened on the phone. What's your point? My point is that Elena Moore loves you, actually loves you. Not your money, not your power, not what you can do for her. Just you, and you love her back. I've watched you pretend you don't for long enough, so either do something about it or let her go. But stop torturing both of you with this halfway existence where you keep her close enough to hurt and far enough to pretend you don't care. You don't understand what you're asking. I understand perfectly. Ryan's voice softened slightly. I understand that you think loving her puts her in danger. But Victor, she's already in danger. She lives in your house, works for you, exists in your orbit. Your enemies already know about her. The only person who doesn't seem to know how much she matters is you. Or maybe you know, and you're just too scared to admit it. The accusation hit harder than Victor wanted to acknowledge. Did she tell you to call me? Elena doesn't know I'm calling. She thinks she's going to wake up tomorrow and you're going to fire her. She thinks tonight was the end of everything. Ryan paused. Is she right? Victor closed his eyes. I don't know. Then figure it out, because that woman deserves better than being loved halfway. And you deserve better than dying alone in this fortress you've built, convinced that sacrifice makes you strong when all it's done is make you miserable. Ryan hung up, and Victor sat in the darkness of his office, the folder still open on his desk, Elena's photograph staring up at him like an accusation. He could fire her, could send her away with enough money to start over, could ensure she was protected from a distance, could lock this door and never open it again, or he could do the most dangerous thing he'd ever done. He could choose her. Victor sat there until dawn started to lighten the sky, until the mansion began to stir with the sounds of morning, until he heard Elena's door open and her quiet footsteps descend the back stairs. He knew what he had to do. He just didn't know if he had the courage to do it. Elena moved through the kitchen like a ghost, going through the motions of making coffee, starting breakfast, maintaining the routine that had defined her life for 3 years. Her eyes were red from crying, her hands trembling slightly as she measured coffee grounds, but she forced herself to function, to hold together just a little longer. She'd made her decision during the sleepless hours before dawn. She would stay until Victor officially dismissed her, would maintain her professionalism, would give him no reason to remember her as anything other than a competent employee who'd briefly lost her head. Then she'd leave, and she'd rebuild. And eventually, maybe years from now, she'd be able to think about Victor Caldero without her chest constricting with loss. The coffee maker hissed and gurgled, filling the kitchen with the rich aroma that usually brought her comfort. Today it just reminded her of every morning she'd made Victor's coffee exactly the way he liked it, hoping for a smile or a thank you or just a moment of acknowledgement that she existed. Elena. She spun around, her heart in her throat. Victor stood in the kitchen doorway, still in yesterday's clothes, his hair disheveled, dark circles under his eyes. He looked like he hadn't slept, like he'd spent the night fighting the same battle she had. "I didn't hear you come down," she managed. "We need to talk." Victor's voice was rough, exhausted. "Not here. Come with me." It wasn't a request. Elena turned off the coffee maker with shaking hands and followed Victor through the mansion, her mind racing through a dozen scenarios, none of them ending well. They didn't go to his office. Instead, Victor led her outside, through the garden she maintained, to a small guest house at the edge of the property that she'd never entered. He unlocked the door and held it open for her. Elena stepped inside and felt her breath catch. The guest house was beautiful. Hardwood floors, large windows overlooking the grounds, furniture that suggested someone actually lived here rather than just storing things. Personal touches were everywhere. Photographs on the mantel, books stacked on end tables, a jacket thrown over the back of a chair. "I don't understand," Elena whispered. "What is this place?" "Somewhere I can think." Victor closed the door behind them, and suddenly the space felt impossibly small. Somewhere away from the security cameras and the guards and the constant surveillance. The only place in this entire compound where I can be myself instead of Victor Caldero. He gestured to the couch, and Elena sat, her legs unsteady. Victor remained standing, pacing to the window and back, his movements restless, agitated. "I need to tell you something," he said finally, "and I need you to listen without interrupting, because if I stop, I won't be able to start again." Elena nodded, not trusting her voice. Victor took a deep breath. "When you told me you loved me last night, I said you didn't know what you were asking for. I said that in my world, emotion is weakness and love is a death sentence. I believed that. I believed it for 20 years since I watched my father get killed because he loved my mother too much to see her betrayal coming." Elena's chest tightened, but she stayed silent, letting him talk. "So I built walls," Victor continued. "I made myself untouchable, unreachable, cold. I eliminated every vulnerability, buried every emotion, locked away every part of myself that could be used against me. And it worked. I built an empire. I survived where others didn't. I proved that control was stronger than feeling." He turned to face her, and Elena saw the raw pain in his eyes. "Then you walked into my life 3 years ago, and everything I'd built started cracking. Because you didn't care about my power, or my money, or my reputation. You cared about whether I'd eaten, whether I was sleeping, whether the books I was reading brought me any joy. You existed in my space without asking for anything except the chance to make my life easier. And I—" Victor's voice broke slightly. "I fell in love with you. Slowly, terrifyingly, inevitably. I fell in love with your quiet strength and your gentle persistence and the way you saw through every wall I'd built and chose to stay anyway. And that terrified me more than any enemy, any threat, any danger I'd ever faced, because I couldn't control it, couldn't calculate it, couldn't protect you from it." Elena felt tears streaming down her face, but she didn't move, didn't interrupt, barely breathed. "So I kept you invisible," Victor said quietly. "I convinced myself that if I didn't acknowledge what I felt, it would go away. That if I kept you at a distance, you'd be safe. That pretending I didn't love you was the same as actually not loving you." He laughed, and the sound was bitter. "I was lying to myself. I've been lying to myself for 3 years. And last night, when I saw you with Ryan, When I watched you smile at him the way I wanted you to smile at me, I couldn't lie anymore." He crossed the room and knelt in front of her, taking her hands in his. His palms were warm, slightly rough, trembling. "Elena, I love you," Victor said, and his voice was steady despite the emotion in his eyes. "I have loved you for 3 years. I love the way you hum when you think no one's listening. I love how you leave books for me without expecting acknowledgement. I love your strength and your courage and the way you called me out last night for being a coward. And you were right. I am a coward because I've been so scared of losing you that I never gave us a chance to begin." Elena couldn't speak past the tightness in her throat. She squeezed his hands, tears falling freely now. "I can't promise you safety," Victor continued. "I can't promise that my world won't touch you, that my enemies won't try to use you against me. But I can promise you this. I will spend every day for the rest of my life protecting you, loving you, choosing you. If you'll let me. If you still want—" Elena pulled her hands free and cupped his face, cutting off his words with a kiss that held 3 years of longing, hope, and finally, requited love. Victor made a sound somewhere between a gasp and a groan and pulled her closer, his arms wrapping around her waist, his kiss desperate and reverent all at once. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Elena rested her forehead against his. "I love you," she whispered. "I love you, and I'm not going anywhere. I don't care about the danger or the enemies or the impossible odds. I care about you, just you." Victor's arms tightened around her. "You're sure? Because once we cross this line, there's no going back. You won't be my housekeeper anymore. You'll be mine. Publicly. Permanently. Everyone will know. Everyone will see." "Good," Elena said fiercely. "I'm tired of being invisible. I want the whole world to know that I love Victor Caldero, that you're mine as much as I'm yours." Something in Victor's expression softened, transformed. He stood, pulling her with him, and kissed her again, slower this time, deeper, like he was memorizing the taste of her, the feel of her in his arms. "No more hiding," he murmured against her lips. "No more halfway," Elena agreed. And in the quiet sanctuary of the guest house, with the morning sun streaming through the windows, Victor Caldero made the most dangerous choice of his life. He chose love. They stayed in the guest house until the sun climbed higher in the sky, until the reality of what they'd just decided began to settle over them like morning dew. Elena sat curled against Victor's side on the couch, his arm around her shoulders, her head resting in the hollow of his throat where she could feel his pulse beating steady and strong. Neither of them spoke. Words felt unnecessary after everything they'd confessed, after the walls had finally come down. But eventually, inevitably, the outside world intruded. Victor's phone buzzed insistently from where he'd left it on the side table. He ignored it the first 3 times, but on the 4th, Elena lifted her head and met his eyes. "You should answer that," she said softly. "Your empire doesn't stop running just because we finally figured ourselves out." Victor's lips quirked in something almost like a smile. "My empire can wait 5 more minutes." But he reached for the phone anyway, and Elena watched his expression shift from content to alert in the space of a heartbeat. Whatever message he was reading, it wasn't good. "What is it?" she asked. "Meeting tonight, the kind I can't postpone." Victor's voice had taken on the edge of command she recognized from overhearing his business calls. Representatives from 3 families, neutral ground, delicate negotiations. Marcus has been setting it up for weeks. Elena felt something cold settle in her stomach. This was the reality of Victor's world, the part she'd observed from a distance but never truly touched. "Is it dangerous?" "Everything I do is dangerous." Victor set the phone down and turned to face her fully, his hand coming up to cup her cheek. "But I need you to understand something, Elena. Now that we've done this, now that I've claimed you, the danger doesn't decrease. If anything, it intensifies. My enemies will see you as leverage. They'll look for ways to use you against me." "Then we'll deal with it." Elena's voice was steadier than she felt. "Together. That's what this means, isn't it? No more you protecting me from shadows while keeping me locked away. We face whatever comes as partners." Something flickered in Victor's eyes. Pride, maybe, or fear, or some combination of both. Partners. I like the sound of that. But Elena, I need you to promise me something. Anything. If I tell you to run, you run. If I tell you to hide, you hide. If I give you an order in a moment of crisis, you don't question it, you don't hesitate, you trust that I'm doing everything in my power to keep you alive. His grip on her face tightened slightly. Can you promise me that? Elena thought about arguing, about insisting that partnership meant equal say in decisions. But she saw the desperate need in Victor's expression and understood that this was non-negotiable. His world had rules and survival depended on following them. I promise, she said. But you have to promise me something too. What? No more shutting me out. No more making decisions about us without talking to me first. If we're doing this, we do it honestly, completely. No half measures, no protective lies, no matter how well-intentioned. Victor studied her for a long moment, then nodded slowly. No more shutting you out, you have my word. He leaned in and kissed her, soft and lingering, like he was sealing the promise. When they pulled apart, the businessman had returned to his expression, focused, calculating, already planning for the night ahead. We need to go back to the house, he said. I have preparations to make, and we need to discuss how we're going to handle this. The transition. People knowing about us. Elena's stomach fluttered nervously. Your people, your organization. They won't approve, will they? A crime boss falling for his housekeeper? It doesn't exactly project strength. Ooh. I don't give a damn what they approve of. Victor's voice turned hard. But you're right that we need to be strategic about this. My world respects power, and we need to present a united front. No weakness, no uncertainty. If anyone sees you as my weakness, they'll exploit it. So we show them you're my strength instead. How do we do that? Victor stood, offering her his hand. By making sure everyone understands that you're under my protection now. Not as an employee, but as mine. Anyone who threatens you threatens me directly. Anyone who disrespects you disrespects my judgment. We make the cost of touching you so high that even my enemies think twice. Elena took his hand and let him pull her to her feet, but doubt nagged at her. Victor, I don't know how to be what you need me to be in your world. I'm a housekeeper. I know how to clean and cook and stay out of the way. I don't know how to navigate criminal politics or present a strong front or, Elena. Victor pulled her close, his hands framing her face. You stood up to me last night. You called me out on my lies, demanded I see you, refused to back down even when I tried to intimidate you into silence. You have more strength in your little finger than half the people in my organization. You just need to trust it. I trust you, she whispered. Then that's enough. For now. He kissed her forehead, gentle and protective. Come on, we have work to do. They walked back to the mansion together, and Elena felt the shift immediately. Guards who normally looked through her now tracked her movement with sharp attention. Marcus, standing by the back entrance, did a double-take when he saw her walking beside Victor, their hands almost but not quite touching. Sir, Marcus said carefully, his eyes flickering between them. The preparations for tonight are underway. Do you need... He paused, clearly uncertain how to proceed. Elena will be attending the meeting tonight, Victor said, and Elena's heart stopped. Victor, I don't think... She started, but he squeezed her hand gently, silencing her. Marcus's expression remained neutral, but Elena saw the calculation happening behind his eyes. Sir, with respect, having a civilian present during family negotiations could be seen as... Elena is not a civilian, not anymore. Victor's voice carried absolute authority. She's under my direct protection, which means she has every right to be present at any meeting I attend. Make the necessary arrangements. She'll need appropriate security, a full briefing on who's attending, and a seat at the table. At the table? Marcus's composure cracked slightly. Sir, the other families will question. Let them question. They'll receive the same answer. Elena Moore is mine. Anyone who has a problem with that can take it up with me directly. Victor's eyes went cold. Are we clear, Marcus? Crystal, sir. Marcus nodded once, then turned to Elena. His expression softened marginally. Ma'am, I'll need to go over security protocols with you before tonight. The meeting location, potential threats, emergency procedures. If you'll give me an hour to arrange things, we can... I'll bring her to the security office in 2 hours, Victor interrupted. Right now we have other matters to discuss. Marcus stepped aside, and Victor led Elena through the mansion to his office. Once inside with the door closed, Elena finally let herself breathe. Victor, I can't go to that meeting. I don't know anything about your business, about these families, about what's being negotiated. I'll be a liability. You'll be a statement. Victor moved to his desk and pulled out a tablet, tapping through screens. Elena, these meetings aren't just about business. They're about power dynamics, about respect, about showing strength. By making it clear that you're important enough to include in high-level negotiations, I'm telling every person in that room that you matter, that you're protected at the highest level. Or you're painting a target on my back. The target's already there. Victor looked up from the tablet, his expression grim. The moment I walked into Moretti's last night, the moment I confronted you in front of Ryan, I made our connection visible. My enemies aren't stupid, Elena. They've probably already started gathering information on you, looking for ways to exploit what they perceive as my newest weakness. So we don't hide it. We own it. We make it clear that you're not a weakness. You're a line in the sand that no one crosses. Elena sank into one of the leather chairs facing his desk, her mind reeling. This is insane. 24 hours ago, I was invisible. Now you want me to sit at a table with crime bosses and act like I belong there. You do belong there, because I say you do. Victor came around the desk and knelt in front of her chair, taking her hands. Elena, I know this is overwhelming. I know I'm asking you to trust me with your safety, your life, your future. But I need you to understand something. I have spent 20 years building the reputation that keeps me alive. I don't make rash decisions. I don't show weakness. I don't bring people into my inner circle unless I'm absolutely certain they can handle it. And I'm certain about you. How can you be certain? You barely know me outside of how I take care of your house. I know you stood up to me when most people won't even make eye contact. I know you've lived in the heart of a criminal empire for 3 years and never once asked questions you shouldn't, never once betrayed a confidence, never once showed fear even when you probably should have. I know you're strong enough to love me despite knowing exactly what I am. That's not weakness, Elena. That's courage. Elena wanted to believe him, wanted to trust that she could be what he needed, but fear clawed at her throat. What if I mess this up? What if I say the wrong thing, or do something that makes you look weak, or... Then we handle it together. Victor's grip on her hands tightened. That's what partners do. But Elena, I need you to try. I need you to walk into that room tonight and show them that you're not afraid, that you trust me absolutely. Can you do that? She looked into his eyes and saw the vulnerability beneath the command, the fear that maybe he was asking too much, pushing too hard, too fast. And Elena realized that Victor was just as terrified as she was, not of his enemies, but of losing her before they'd even really begun. Yes, she said quietly, I can do that. Relief flooded Victor's expression. He pulled her into his arms, holding her tight enough that Elena felt his heart racing against her chest. Thank you, he murmured into her hair. I promise I won't let anything happen to you. I know. Elena pulled back enough to meet his eyes. But Victor, you need to promise me something else. What? If this gets too dangerous, if keeping me close puts you at risk, you'll tell me. You won't sacrifice your safety or your empire because you're trying to protect me. We find another way, but we don't throw away everything you've built. Victor's jaw clenched. There is no scenario where I choose the empire over you. Victor? No. His voice turned fierce. Elena, I have spent 20 years choosing power over everything else. Over family, over friendship, over any possibility of love or connection or happiness. I'm done making that choice. The empire exists to give me control over my life, to give me the freedom to make my own decisions. And I'm deciding that you matter more than any of it. That's not negotiable. Elena felt tears prick her eyes. You can't mean that. I've never meant anything more. Victor cupped her face, his thumbs brushing away the tears that had started to fall. I love you, Elena. And love means you come first, always. If I have to burn my empire to the ground to keep you safe, I'll do it without hesitation. That's insane. Maybe. Victor smiled, and it transformed his face into something younger, lighter, almost happy. But it's true. So get used to it, because I'm not changing my mind. Elena laughed despite herself, a watery sound that turned into a sob halfway through. Victor pulled her close again, and they stayed like that until Elena's breathing steadied, until the fear receded enough that she could think clearly again. "Okay," she said finally. "Okay. We do this. We go to the meeting, we present a united front, we show them I'm not a weakness. But Victor, you have to brief me. Everything. Who's going to be there, what they want, what the politics are. I can't walk in blind." "Agreed." Victor stood and helped her to her feet. "We have 6 hours until the meeting. That's enough time to prepare you, get you appropriate clothing, and run through potential scenarios. But first, we need to deal with the staff." Elena's stomach dropped. "The staff?" "Right. They're going to have questions. Questions I'm going to answer very clearly." Victor moved to his desk and pressed the intercom. "Marcus, assemble all household staff in the main foyer in 15 minutes. Everyone. No exceptions." "Yes, sir." Victor released the button and turned back to Elena. "This is the easy part. Watch." 15 minutes later, Elena stood beside Victor at the top of the main staircase, looking down at the assembled staff. Housekeepers, cooks, drivers, gardeners, security personnel. Faces she'd worked alongside for 3 years, people who'd seen her as just another employee, now staring up at her with varying degrees of confusion and curiosity. Victor's hand rested at the small of her back, a clear gesture of possession that made Elena's pulse race. "Thank you all for gathering on short notice," Victor said, his voice carrying easily through the foyer. "I have an announcement that affects everyone in this household. Effective immediately, Elena Moore is no longer employed as my housekeeper. She is under my direct personal protection and will be treated accordingly." Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Elena saw shock, speculation, and on a few faces, understanding. "What this means practically," Victor continued, his voice hardening slightly, "is that Elena has full access to all areas of this house, full authority to make decisions regarding household operations, and the complete support of my security team. Anyone who disrespects her, questions her authority, or fails to provide her with the same level of protection they provide me will be terminated immediately. Are there any questions?" Silence. The kind of heavy silence that came from people frantically recalculating their understanding of power dynamics. "Good." Victor's hand pressed slightly more firmly against Elena's back. "Elena, do you have anything you'd like to add?" Every eye in the foyer turned to her. Elena's throat went dry. This was the moment, the first test of whether she could actually do this, could actually step into the role Victor needed her to fill. "I know this is unexpected," she said, forcing her voice to remain steady. "And I know it changes the dynamic we've all operated under for the past 3 years. But I want to be clear. I'm not here to make your lives harder. I'm not interested in power games or establishing dominance. What I'm interested in is supporting Victor and maintaining the efficiency of this household, so we continue doing what we've been doing, just with slightly different parameters. If anyone has concerns, my door is open. That's all." It wasn't a rousing speech, but it was honest, and Elena saw several of the staff members nod in approval. Victor's hand moved to her waist, a gesture of approval that sent warmth through her chest. "Dismissed," Victor said, and the staff dispersed quickly, already buzzing with whispered conversations. Marcus approached the stairs, his expression thoughtful. "Well handled, ma'am, if I may say so." "You may," Elena said, surprised by how natural the response felt. "Victor mentioned you'd brief me on security protocols for tonight?" "Among other things," Marcus glanced at Victor. "Sir, we should also discuss the optics of Elena's presence at the meeting. There will be questions, and we need consistent answers." "The answer is simple," Victor said. "Elena is mine. Anyone who needs more explanation than that isn't paying attention." Marcus's lips twitched in what might have been the beginning of a smile. "Understood, sir. Elena, shall we start with the basics?" The next 6 hours passed in a blur. Marcus walked Elena through threat assessments, emergency protocols, and the complicated politics of the 5 families that controlled Los Angeles's underworld. Victor provided context, filled in gaps, explained relationships and grudges that went back decades. By the time Elena's head was spinning with information, a stylist had arrived with clothing options. "You need to look the part," Victor explained as Elena stared at the array of elegant dresses laid out in one of the guest rooms. "Powerful, confident, untouchable. These families respect strength, and appearance matters." Elena chose a deep emerald dress that hugged her curves without being provocative, paired with simple jewelry and heels that added 3 inches to her height. When she looked in the mirror, she barely recognized herself. The nervous housekeeper had disappeared, replaced by someone who looked like she could belong at Victor Caldero's side. Victor appeared in the doorway, now dressed in a tailored suit that made him look every inch the crime boss he was. His eyes traveled over Elena with an intensity that made her breath catch. "Perfect," he said quietly. "You look perfect." "I look terrified." "You look fierce." Victor crossed the room and turned her to face the mirror, standing behind her with his hands on her shoulders. "Look at yourself, Elena. Really look. That's not fear in your eyes. That's determination. That's strength. That's the woman I fell in love with." Elena studied their reflection, Victor tall and commanding behind her, her own expression more confident than she felt, the two of them together looking like they actually belonged in the same world. "Okay," she whispered. "I can do this." "I know you can." Victor pressed a kiss to her temple. "Ready?" "No. But let's go anyway." The meeting was held in a private room at an upscale restaurant Victor's people had swept for surveillance and secured from multiple angles. Marcus rode in the car with them, along with 2 additional security personnel, and Elena watched the city blur past while Victor held her hand, his thumb tracing absent patterns on her skin. "Remember," he said quietly as they pulled up to the restaurant, "you don't have to say anything. Just be present. Let them see you're with me, under my protection. That's enough." Elena nodded, not trusting her voice. The car door opened, and Victor stepped out first, then offered his hand to help her. Elena took it, letting him pull her close to his side as they walked into the restaurant with Marcus and the security team flanking them. The private room was already occupied. 3 men sat around a circular table, each with their own security positioned around the room's perimeter. Elena felt the weight of every gaze as they entered, felt the shock ripple through the space when the men registered her presence. Victor's arms settled around her waist, proprietary and protective. "Gentlemen," he said calmly, "thank you for coming. I'd like you to meet Elena Moore. Elena, this is Anthony Marchetti, head of the Marchetti family. Thomas Volkov, representing the Volkov interests. And James Chen, speaking for the Chen organization." The 3 men stared at her, and Elena forced herself to meet each gaze without flinching, without showing the terror racing through her veins. Anthony Marchetti, a man in his 60s with silver hair and cold eyes, spoke first. "Victor, I was under the impression this was a business meeting, not a social occasion." "It is a business meeting," Victor replied smoothly. "Elena is part of my business now. She attends all my meetings going forward." "That's unusual," Thomas Volkov said carefully. He was younger, maybe 40, with the watchful eyes of someone who'd survived by anticipating threats. "In all our years of negotiations, you've never brought anyone to the table before." "Things change." Victor pulled out a chair for Elena, waited until she sat, then took the seat beside her. His hand found hers under the table, hidden from view but grounding her. "Shall we begin?" The meeting proceeded with Elena sitting silently beside Victor, watching the complex dance of negotiation, threat, and compromise unfold. Territory disputes, profit sharing, mutual protection agreements. The men discussed violence and crime with the same casual efficiency that businessmen discussed quarterly earnings. And through it all, Elena felt the weight of scrutiny, the constant assessment happening behind careful expressions. These men were trying to understand what she meant to Victor, trying to determine if she was weakness or strength, liability or asset. Halfway through the meeting, James Chen, who'd remained mostly silent until now, suddenly addressed her directly. "Ms. Moore, you've been very patient sitting through this tedious discussion. Tell me, do you understand the business we're conducting here?" The room went silent. Elena felt Victor tense beside her, felt the test in Chen's question. This was the moment. the first real challenge. She could demur, could play innocent, could hide behind Victor's protection. Or she could show them exactly what Victor already knew, that she was stronger than she looked. I understand you're discussing territorial boundaries in the downtown corridor, Elena said calmly, keeping her voice level. Specifically, who controls the waterfront development contracts and how profits will be distributed among the families. I also understand that you've been arguing in circles for the last 20 minutes because none of you want to be the first to concede ground, even though the solution is obvious. Chen's eyebrows rose. Obvious? Rotate control quarterly, Elena said. Each family gets 3 months of primary access with a percentage of profits shared across all parties, regardless of whose quarter it is. That way everyone benefits, no one loses face, and the distribution balances out over the year. It's not complicated. You're just making it complicated because you're all too proud to suggest compromise first. Dead silence filled the room. Elena felt her heart hammering, wondered if she'd just made a catastrophic mistake. Then Anthony Marchetti started laughing, a genuine, surprised bark of laughter that transformed his stern expression into something almost human. "She's got fire, Caldero," he said, shaking his head. "I'll give you that. And she's not wrong about the solution either." Victor's hand tightened on Elena's, and when she glanced at him, she saw pride burning in his eyes. "Elena has excellent instincts," he said smoothly, "which is why she's at this table. Gentlemen, shall we implement her suggestion?" The meeting concluded an hour later with agreements signed, hands shaken, and a new respect in the eyes of the men who'd initially questioned Elena's presence. As they walked back to the car, Victor pulled her close and pressed a kiss to her hair. "That was perfect," he murmured. "You were perfect." Elena let out a shaky breath. "I thought I was going to pass out." "You hit it well." Victor helped her into the car, then slid in beside her. Once the door closed and they had privacy, he pulled her into his arms properly. "Elena, what you did in there, standing your ground, offering solutions instead of backing down, that's exactly what I needed them to see. You showed them you're not just my weakness, you're my partner." It was terrifying. "Welcome to my world," Victor's voice held dark amusement. "It doesn't get less terrifying. You just get better at hiding the fear." Elena tilted her head back to look at him. "Is this what every day is going to be like? Tests and politics and constantly proving I belong?" "For a while, yes, until they accept you as part of the landscape." Victor's expression turned serious. "But Elena, if it's too much, if you want to step back, find a different way." "No," Elena cut him off firmly. "I told you I was in this. I meant it. I'm not running just because it's hard. Even if it gets harder, even then." Elena cupped his face, making him meet her eyes. "Victor, I've spent 3 years loving you from a distance, convincing myself that close enough was good enough. I'm done with halfway. Whatever comes next, we face it together. That's what you promised me, remember?" Victor's eyes softened. "No more halfway," he agreed quietly. "No more distance." He kissed her then, deep and claiming, and Elena kissed him back with 3 years of pent-up longing finally released. When they finally broke apart, the car was pulling through the mansion gates, and reality was waiting. But for the first time since this had all begun, Elena didn't feel afraid. She felt ready. The mansion felt different when they returned that night. Elena walked through the front door on Victor's arm, and the staff members they passed didn't look through her anymore. They nodded respectfully, stepped aside with acknowledgement, treated her like she actually existed in this space she'd occupied as a ghost for 3 years. It should have felt like victory. Instead, it felt like standing on the edge of a precipice, waiting for the ground to give way. Victor seemed to sense her unease. He kept her close as they climbed the stairs, his hand warm and steady at the small of her back. When they reached the second-floor landing, he paused. "Your room is on the 3rd floor," he said quietly. "But I'd like you to stay with me tonight, in my room, if you're comfortable with that." Elena's heart skipped. They'd confessed their love, kissed, declared themselves partners in front of crime bosses, but this felt more intimate somehow, more real. The difference between proclamation and practice. "I'm comfortable with that," she said, and meant it. Victor's bedroom occupied the entire east wing of the second floor, a space Elena had cleaned hundreds of times but never truly seen. Now, walking through the door as a guest instead of staff, she noticed details she'd trained herself to overlook. The king-sized bed with its dark sheets, the wall of windows overlooking the gardens, the personal touches that revealed the man beneath the crime boss, photographs of a younger Victor with people she didn't recognize, books on philosophy and history stacked on the nightstand, a worn leather jacket thrown over a chair. "I'll have your things moved down here tomorrow," Victor said, shrugging out of his suit jacket. "Unless you'd prefer to keep your own space. I don't want to assume—" "Victor," Elena turned to face him, stopping his nervous rambling. "I want to be here, with you. Stop second-guessing everything." He smiled, and it transformed his face into something younger, less burdened. "I'm not used to this. Having someone in my space, in my life. I'm trying not to mess it up." "You won't mess it up." Elena crossed to him, reaching up to loosen his tie. "We'll probably both make mistakes. That's normal. But we're in this together, remember?" Victor caught her hands, holding them against his chest. "Elena, there's something we need to discuss about what happened tonight at the meeting." The shift in his tone made Elena's stomach tighten. "What about it?" "What you did, speaking up, offering a solution, showing them you weren't intimidated. That was exactly right, but it also painted an even bigger target on you." Victor's grip on her hands tightened. "By proving you're not just arm candy, by demonstrating that you actually understand the business and can contribute to negotiations, you became valuable. And in my world, valuable means dangerous." "I thought the point was to show I wasn't a weakness." "You're not a weakness, but now you're an asset, which is almost worse." Victor led her to sit on the edge of the bed, still holding her hands. "Elena, when someone is perceived as a crime boss's weakness, the strategy is simple: hurt them to hurt him. But when someone is perceived as an asset, as someone who contributes to the boss's decision-making, the calculations change. Now you're not just a target for revenge. You're a target for recruitment, for leverage, for elimination." Elena felt cold seep through her. "You're saying I made things worse by speaking up. I'm saying you did exactly what you needed to do, and now we deal with the consequences." Victor's voice was firm. "Elena, I need you to understand something. In that room tonight, you earned their respect. You showed them you belong at that table. That's invaluable. But respect in my world comes with a price, and the price is that they'll be watching you now, studying you, looking for ways to use you. So what do? We adapt. Starting tomorrow, you'll have personal security. Not just when you're with me, always. You'll learn to shoot, to fight, to recognize threats. You'll understand protocols for different situations, safe houses, emergency contacts. I'm not trying to scare you, Elena. I'm trying to prepare you." Elena took a shaky breath. "This is really happening. This is my life now." "Only if you want it to be." Victor lifted one of her hands to his lips, pressing a kiss to her knuckles. "Elena, I meant what I said before. If this is too much, if you want to step back, find a different way, I'll make it happen. I'll protect you from a distance, set you up somewhere safe, ensure you have everything you need. You don't have to do this. Except I do." Elena met his eyes. "Because stepping back doesn't actually make me safer, does it? The moment you showed interest in me, the moment you made our connection visible, I became a target regardless of whether I'm actively involved in your business. At least this way I have some control. I can learn to protect myself instead of just hoping your security team is always enough." Victor's expression turned fierce. "You're extraordinary. Do you know that?" "I'm terrified." "You can be both." Victor cupped her face, his thumbs brushing her cheekbones. "Elena, I have lived in fear for 20 years. Fear of betrayal, fear of weakness, fear of losing control. But I learned to function despite the fear, to make decisions even when I was scared, to build something despite the constant threat of it all falling apart. You can do the same. You're already doing it." Elena leaned into his touch, drawing strength from his certainty. "Tell me about them. The people in that room tonight. They're real stories, not just the business overview Marcus gave me." Victor settled back against the headboard, pulling Elena with him until she was curled against his side. Anthony Marchetti has run his family for 30 years. He's old school, believes in honor and tradition and keeping his word. He's also ruthless when crossed. His son died 5 years ago, killed by a rival organization, and he never recovered from it. The only thing keeping him in the business is his granddaughter. She's 12 now, and he's building an empire for her to inherit. He doesn't want her in this life. He wants her to have the choice, to have power without having to fight for survival the way he did. Victor's voice was thoughtful. That's why he respected you tonight. He saw strength without brutality, and it reminded him that not everyone in this world has to become a monster to survive. What about Volkov? Thomas Volkov is dangerous because he's unpredictable. He came to Los Angeles 10 years ago from Moscow, built his organization from nothing, operates by different rules than the rest of us. He's younger, more willing to take risks, less concerned with honor codes. But he's also brilliant at reading people, at finding leverage. That's why he tested you tonight. He wanted to see if you'd break under pressure. And Chen? Victor's expression darkened slightly. James Chen is the most dangerous of the three because he plays the long game. He never makes a move without considering 5 steps ahead. His organization controls most of the financial infrastructure that keeps the rest of us operating: money laundering, offshore accounts, legitimate business fronts. He could cripple any of us with a few strategic decisions, and he knows it. But he doesn't. Because we're more valuable to him cooperative than destroyed. Chen understands that power isn't just about domination, it's about creating systems where everyone has too much to lose by disrupting the balance. Victor paused. That's why your presence tonight was so significant. You represented a change to the established balance, and he needed to understand whether that change was a threat or an opportunity. Elena absorbed this, her mind working through the implications. And what did he decide? That you're an opportunity. That having someone at my side who can think strategically, who isn't blinded by ego or tradition, makes me a better partner in negotiations. Which means he'll cultivate a relationship with you, try to earn your trust, position himself as an ally. Is he an ally? Chen is Chen's ally. Everyone else is just a useful variable in his calculations. Victor's arm tightened around her. But that doesn't mean we can't work with him. It just means we never forget what he is. They talked late into the night, Victor sharing stories and insights that transformed the meeting from a terrifying ordeal into a complex chess game Elena was only beginning to understand. She learned about old grudges and unlikely alliances, about the unwritten rules that governed the underworld's interactions, about the careful balance of power that kept all-out war from destroying them all. Finally, exhausted and overwhelmed, Elena fell asleep against Victor's chest, his heartbeat steady beneath her ear. She woke to sunlight streaming through the windows, and Victor already dressed, sitting at a small desk in the corner of the room with his laptop open and phone pressed to his ear. He was speaking in low, clipped tones, business that couldn't wait for normal hours. Elena watched him for a moment, this man who'd somehow become the center of her entire world in the span of 3 days. 3 years of loving him from a distance, and now she was in his bed, in his life, in his business. The transition felt impossibly fast and inevitably slow all at once. Victor ended his call and turned to find her awake. His expression softened immediately. "Good morning. I didn't want to wake you. You were exhausted." "What time is it?" "Almost 9. I've been fielding calls since 6. Victor closed his laptop and crossed to the bed, sitting on the edge. "The word is out about last night, about you. Everyone wants to know who you are, where you came from, what you mean to me." Elena's stomach clenched. "And what are you telling them?" "The truth, that you're mine, and anyone who questions that can take it up with me directly." Victor's smile was sharp. "It's causing quite a stir. Apparently, Victor Caldero falling for his housekeeper is the most interesting gossip the underworld has had in years. I'm sure they think I'm some kind of gold digger, or that you've lost your mind. Let them think whatever they want. I know the truth, and that's all that matters." Victor reached out to tuck a strand of hair behind her ear. "But Elena, we need to discuss your new reality. Starting today, you have a security detail. Marcus has assigned 2 guards specifically to you. They'll shadow you everywhere, even inside the mansion. I know it feels invasive, but it's necessary." "I understand." Elena sat up, pulling the sheet around herself. "What else?" Training starts this afternoon. Marcus will teach you basic self-defense and weapons handling. You'll also meet with my attorney to ensure all your legal documents are in order. Power of attorney, emergency contacts, financial protections. If something happens to me, I need to know you're taken care of. The casual way Victor discussed his potential death made Elena's chest tighten. Nothing's going to happen to you. Probably not, but probably isn't good enough when it comes to your safety. Victor's expression turned serious. Elena, I need you to promise me something. What? If something does happen to me, if I'm arrested or killed, or if the organization falls apart, you run. You don't try to stay and fix things. You don't attempt revenge. You don't make yourself a target. You take the resources I've set aside for you and you disappear. Build a new life somewhere safe. Promise me. Elena felt tears prick her eyes. Victor, I can't promise to abandon you. Yes, you can. Because that's what I need from you. Victor's hands framed her face, forcing her to meet his eyes. Elena, I love you, which means your safety matters more to me than anything else, including my pride, or my need for revenge, or any romantic notion of you standing by my side through disaster. If I'm gone, you survive. That's not negotiable. You can't ask me to. I can, and I am. Victor's voice turned hard. This is the price of being with me. You accept that sometimes I'll make decisions you hate, give orders you don't want to follow, prioritize your survival over your preferences. If you can't accept that, if you can't promise me you'll run if things fall apart, then we need to reconsider this entire arrangement. Elena stared at him, seeing the absolute resolve in his expression. This wasn't about control or domination. This was about a man who'd spent 20 years surviving in a world that killed the weak, who'd watched people he cared about die, who couldn't survive losing her. I promise, she whispered, if something happens to you, I'll run. I'll survive. The tension drained from Victor's shoulders. He pulled her into his arms, holding her tight enough that breathing took effort. Thank you, he murmured into her hair. Thank you. They stayed like that until Victor's phone buzzed again, dragging him back to the endless demands of running a criminal empire. He kissed Elena thoroughly before leaving, promising to return for lunch. And then she was alone in his bedroom, with sunlight streaming through the windows and a future she was still trying to comprehend. A knock on the door interrupted her thoughts. Come in, Elena called, expecting Marcus or one of the staff. Instead, Ryan Hale stepped into the room, his expression carefully neutral. Good morning, Elena. Victor asked me to check on you, make sure you have everything you need. Elena pulled on the robe she'd found draped over a chair, suddenly self-conscious about being in Victor's bedroom. I'm fine, thank you. And Ryan, thank you for the other night. For dinner, for listening, for pushing me to tell the truth. I don't think any of this would have happened if you hadn't forced the issue. Ryan's smile was wry. I'm not sure Victor would thank me for that. He's been in a constant state of terror since you two made this official. He hides it well. He's had a lot of practice hiding things. Ryan moved to the window, looking out at the grounds. Elena, I need to tell you something, and you're not going to like it. Elena's stomach dropped. What? There's been chatter. Our intelligence contacts have picked up increased surveillance on the mansion, questions being asked about you in places they shouldn't be asked. Someone is gathering information, and they're being very careful about it. Which means they're planning something. Probably. We don't know who yet. Could be any number of Victor's enemies, but they're interested in you specifically. That's why Victor pushed so hard this morning about security protocols and safety measures. He's preparing for something to happen. Elena forced herself to breathe slowly, to think instead of panic. What do I need to do? Exactly what you're already doing. Let Marcus train you, follow security protocols, trust your guards. But Elena, there's something else. Ryan turned to face her, his expression troubled. The fact that someone is already moving this quickly, already gathering intel, it suggests they had advanced knowledge. They knew about you before last night's meeting. How's that possible? Victor and I only made this official yesterday. Which means either someone in this house has been reporting to outside sources or someone has been watching you for longer than we realized. Ryan's voice was grim. Victor is conducting an internal review, checking for security breaches. Until we know who we can trust, you need to be careful about what you say and who you say it to. The paranoia that came with Victor's world settled over Elena like a heavy cloak. You think someone on staff is feeding information to his enemies? I think it's a possibility we can't ignore. This mansion has 60 employees, housekeepers, cooks, drivers, gardeners, security personnel. Any one of them could be compromised, either through bribery or coercion. We're running background checks again, looking for connections we might have missed, but until we're certain, trust no one. Elena finished the thought, feeling the walls of her new life closing in. This is what you meant, isn't it? When you said the danger intensifies. It's not just external threats. It's the people around us, the uncertainty of who's loyal and who's waiting for the right price to betray us. Welcome to Victor's world. Ryan's voice held dark sympathy. It doesn't get easier. You just get better at living with the paranoia. After Ryan left, Elena dressed in clothes that had been delivered to Victor's room, her own things, moved from her third-floor room without her even asking. The efficiency of it should have been comforting. Instead, it reminded her that nothing in this house happened without Victor's knowledge and approval, that privacy was an illusion and safety was a constant negotiation. Marcus arrived promptly at 1 o'clock to begin training. He led Elena to a converted basement room she'd never known existed, reinforced walls, padded floors, weapons lockers secured with a biometric lock. We'll start with basics, Marcus said, his tone all business. Situational awareness, recognizing threats, creating distance between yourself and attackers. Then we'll move to hand-to-hand combat and eventually firearms. The goal isn't to make you a soldier, Elena. It's to give you enough skills that you can buy yourself time to escape if something goes wrong. The training was brutal. Marcus pushed her through drills that left her sweating and shaking, correcting her stance, her grip, her instincts. Hours passed in a blur of instruction and repetition until Elena's muscles screamed and her mind felt stuffed with information. Enough for today, Marcus finally said. You did well. Natural athlete, quick learner. We'll build on this tomorrow. Elena bent over, hands on her knees, trying to catch her breath. Does it always hurt this much? Only until your body adapts. Give it a week. You'll be stronger than you realize. Marcus handed her a bottle of water. Elena, can I speak candidly? Please? Victor is different with you. More human, less controlled. Marcus chose his words carefully. In the 8 years I've worked for him, I've never seen him let anyone get close. The fact that he's letting you in, making you part of his life, it's either going to save him or destroy him. That's a lot of pressure. That's the truth. And you deserve to know it. Marcus met her eyes. Victor has enemies who would kill to have the leverage you represent. But he also has people, like me, like Ryan, who would die to protect what you mean to him. Because seeing him happy, seeing him care about something other than survival and power, it reminds us why we're in this, what we're fighting for. Elena felt the weight of that responsibility settle on her shoulders. I'll do my best not to be his downfall. I don't think you could be, even if you tried. You're too stubborn, and he's too far gone on you. Marcus smiled slightly. But be careful, Elena. Trust your instincts. And if something feels wrong, it probably is. Elena showered and changed, her muscles already starting to stiffen from the training, and found Victor in his office reviewing documents with a frown that suggested nothing good. Problems? She asked from the doorway. Victor looked up and his expression softened immediately. Nothing I can't handle. How was training? Painful. Educational. Slightly terrifying. Elena crossed to his desk. Marcus is thorough. He's the best. If anyone can prepare you for what might come, it's him. Victor set aside his papers and pulled Elena into his lap. She went willingly, tucking herself against his chest. I've been thinking about something. What? This whole situation, us being together, you entering my world, it's moving fast. Maybe too fast. I'm asking you to adapt to things most people take years to understand, to accept dangers that even career criminals struggle with. If you need time, if you want to slow down, I don't want to slow down. Elena tilted her head back to look at him. Victor, I spent 3 years going slow. 3 years loving you carefully, quietly, from a safe distance. I'm done with slow. I'd rather have one real day with you than another 3 years of halfway. Even if that one real day comes with threats and violence and constant fear? Even then, Elena cupped his face, making him meet her eyes. I'm not naive, Victor. I know what I'm signing up for. I know it's dangerous and complicated, and that I might not survive it, but I also know that I love you, and that love is worth the risk. So stop trying to give me an exit. I'm staying. Victor kissed her like a drowning man finding air, desperate and grateful and fierce all at once. When they finally broke apart, he rested his forehead against hers. I don't deserve you, he murmured. Probably not. But you've got me anyway. Elena smiled despite the tears on her cheeks. Now tell me what's really wrong. What was in those documents that had you frowning? Victor hesitated, then sighed. The background checks Ryan mentioned. We found something. One of the housekeepers, woman who's been with us for 2 years, has a brother with gambling debts, substantial debts, to one of our rival organizations. Elena's blood ran cold. You think she's been feeding them information to pay off the debts? I think it's possible. We're investigating, but carefully. If we spook her before we know the full extent of the breach, we might miss other compromises. Victor's arms tightened around her. This is what I was afraid of, Elena. The betrayals, the constant suspicion, never knowing who to trust. This is the reality of my world. Then we deal with it together, Elena said firmly. We investigate, we find the truth, we handle whatever comes. But Victor, we can't let paranoia destroy us from the inside. That's what they want. For us to be so scared of betrayal that we push away everyone who might actually be loyal. When did you get so wise about criminal politics? I've been paying attention. Elena kissed him softly. Now, what's our next move? Victor's smile was sharp, dangerous, and deeply satisfied. Our next move is dinner. I'm taking you out, publicly, where everyone can see us together. Let the whole city know that Victor Caldero is off the market and Elena Moore is untouchable. What do you say? I say you're insane and I love you for it. Elena stood, offering her hand. Let's go make a statement. They did exactly that, walking into the city's most exclusive restaurant with Elena on Victor's arm, her head high and her fear carefully hidden. The room fell silent when they entered, every eye tracking their movement to a private table where Victor held her chair like she was royalty. And through the dinner, through the whispered speculation and barely concealed stares, Elena felt something shift inside her. She wasn't the invisible housekeeper anymore. She wasn't the girl who loved from a distance. She was Victor Caldero's partner, his equal, his choice, and she was ready for whatever came next. The restaurant buzzed with barely concealed curiosity as Elena and Victor finished their meal, but it was the silence that followed them out that spoke volumes. Word would spread before they even reached the car. Victor Caldero, untouchable crime boss, utterly devoted to a woman who'd been invisible in his world just days ago. The message was clear, deliberate, and exactly what Victor had intended. But as they drove back to the mansion, Elena couldn't shake the feeling that something was coming, a storm gathering just beyond the horizon, waiting for the right moment to break. She was right. They'd barely walked through the front door when Marcus appeared, his expression grim. Sir, we have a situation. The housekeeper, Maria Gonzalez, she's gone. Left sometime during dinner, took nothing with her except her phone and purse. Victor's entire demeanor changed in an instant, the relaxed man from dinner vanishing behind cold calculation. When? Security logs show she left through the service entrance at 8:43 m. She disabled her tracking chip before leaving, crushed it in the kitchen sink. We found the pieces. She knew we were onto her. Victor's voice was flat, dangerous, which means someone tipped her off, or she's been monitoring our communications. Either way, we have a bigger problem than one compromised employee. Elena felt her training kick in. The awareness Marcus had drilled into her, sharpening her focus. If she ran, that means whatever she was planning is about to happen. She wouldn't abandon her position unless the endgame was close enough that staying was more dangerous than running. Victor turned to her, and Elena saw approval flash in his eyes before concern overtook it. Marcus, lockdown protocols, now. No one in or out without my direct authorization. Elena, you're going to the safe room. I'm not hiding while you handle this. Elena, no. She stepped closer to him, keeping her voice firm. You said we're partners. You said no more halfway. That means I don't run to the safe room while you face whatever's coming. We handle this together, or not at all. Victor's jaw clenched, the war between protecting her and respecting her choice playing out across his face. Finally, he nodded once, sharp and decisive. Fine. But you stay close to me, you follow every order without question, and if I tell you to run, you run. Agreed? Agreed. Marcus had already mobilized the security team, guards taking positions throughout the mansion, weapons drawn, every entrance secured. The transformation from elegant home to fortress happened in minutes, and Elena realized this was always what the mansion had been. Beautiful camouflage over brutal functionality. Victor's phone rang. He answered it, listened for 10 seconds, and his expression turned to stone. When? How many? Understood. Hold position. He ended the call and turned to Marcus. 3 cars just breached the outer perimeter. Armed men, at least 15 confirmed. They're not trying to be subtle. This is a direct attack? Elena's voice stayed steady despite her racing heart. On your home? This is a statement. Victor's eyes were cold, calculating. Someone wants to prove I'm vulnerable. That loving you makes me weak. They're wrong, but they're about to make their point in blood. The sound of gunfire shattered the night, sharp cracks from the perimeter, the deeper boom of shotguns returning fire. Elena flinched but held her ground as Victor pulled her toward his office. The office is reinforced, he explained, moving with practiced efficiency. Bulletproof glass, reinforced steel door, independent security system. If they breach the main house, this is where we make our stand. They'd barely cleared the doorway when Ryan appeared, blood on his sleeve but his expression focused. South entrance is compromised. They're using some kind of explosive charge. Took out the door and 2 guards. We're falling back to secondary positions. Casualties? Victor's voice was clipped, professional. 3 wounded, none critical. But Victor, these aren't amateurs. They're moving with military precision, using communication equipment that suggests serious funding. This isn't some rival crew making a grab for territory. This is coordinated, planned, professional. Elena's mind raced through the implications. The meeting, the other families. Someone from that table is making a move? Or someone using the meeting as cover to identify weaknesses? Victor moved to a hidden panel in the wall, pressing his palm against it. The panel slid open, revealing monitors showing security feeds throughout the property. Ryan, get to the command center. Coordinate our response. I want these bastards identified and neutralized. Ryan hesitated, his eyes flickering to Elena. You sure you want her here? If they breach the office, they won't. Victor's voice held absolute certainty. And if they do, I'd rather have her where I can protect her than wondering if she's safe somewhere else. Go. Ryan left and Victor turned to Elena. I need you to listen very carefully. Behind that bookcase is a panic room. If I tell you to get in there, you don't argue, you don't hesitate. You get inside, you lock the door, and you don't open it for anyone except me or Marcus. The room has supplies for 3 days, communication equipment, and a separate exit that leads to a tunnel system under the property. If the worst happens, you use that tunnel and you run. Understand? Elena nodded, her throat too tight for words. On the monitors, she watched the battle unfold. Victor's security team engaging the attackers with brutal efficiency. The intruders pressing forward despite taking casualties. The whole violent dance playing out across the mansion's grounds. Then one monitor went dark. Then another. They're taking out the cameras. Victor's hands moved across a keyboard, pulling up alternate feeds. Systematic, coordinated. They've studied our security system. Which means Maria gave them more than just information about me. Elena watched the screens, her training helping her track the patterns. She gave them security protocols, camera locations, guard rotations. They know everything about this place. Not everything. Victor's smile was cold, sharp. I have contingencies that only Marcus and I know about. Systems that can't be compromised because they're not in any database, not accessible through any network. They think they know this house, but they're about to learn otherwise. He pressed a series of buttons, and suddenly the mansion's lights cut out completely. Emergency lighting flickered on in the office, but on the monitors, Elena watched the attackers falter in sudden darkness. The mansion has 2 electrical systems, Victor explained. the main grid that controls everything visible, and a secondary system that only powers critical defensive measures. By cutting the main power, I've disabled their ability to track our movements while our people operate with night vision equipment they've trained with for exactly this scenario. On the monitors, the tide began to turn. Victor's guards, now with a significant advantage, pushed back against the attackers with renewed aggression. Bodies fell. The intruders' careful coordination broke down as they struggled to adapt to changed circumstances. Victor's phone rang again. "Talk to me." He listened, his expression unchanging. "Good. Take them alive if possible. I want to know who sent them. If they resist, put them down." He ended the call and turned to Elena. "It's almost over. They're retreating to the vehicles. Marcus is coordinating pursuit." But Elena was watching one monitor in particular, her attention caught by movement that didn't match the chaos of battle. A single figure moving through the darkened mansion with too much confidence, too much knowledge of the layout. "Victor, look at this feed. East corridor, second floor. That person isn't dressed like the attackers." Victor's eyes snapped to the monitor, and Elena watched his expression turn deadly. "That's not one of theirs. That's someone who knows this house. Someone with access to areas the attackers couldn't have mapped." The figure moved purposefully toward Victor's office, and Elena felt ice slide through her veins as recognition hit. The build, the movement pattern, the familiar way they navigated the hallway. "That's Maria," she whispered. She didn't run. She stayed inside, waiting for the attack to provide cover. Victor was already moving, pulling a handgun from a desk drawer and checking the chamber with practiced efficiency. "Elena, panic room. Now!" "Victor, now!" His voice cracked like a whip, and Elena ran to the bookcase, her fingers finding the hidden latch Victor had shown her. The case swung open, revealing a small reinforced room beyond. She started to enter, then stopped. On the monitor, Maria had reached the office door. She was holding something in her hand, something that looked horribly like a detonator. "Victor, she has a bomb!" Elena's voice was sharp with fear. Victor spun back to the monitors, saw what Elena had seen, and his expression turned to ice. "Get in the panic room and seal the door. That's an order, Elena." "I'm not leaving you." "You promised me." Victor's eyes met hers, and Elena saw raw fear beneath the command. "You promised if things fell apart, you'd run. This is me telling you to run. Please, Elena, please." The door to the office exploded inward. Elena screamed, throwing herself backward into the panic room as debris filled the air. Through the smoke and chaos, she saw Victor dive behind his desk, saw Maria step through the shattered doorway with a gun in one hand and cold determination on her face. "Victor Caldero," Maria's voice was steady, almost sad. "I'm sorry it came to this. I actually liked working for you." "Then why?" Victor's voice came from behind the desk, calm despite the circumstances. "The gambling debts? Was it really just money?" "It's always money." Maria moved further into the office, her gun tracking Victor's position. "My brother owed $200,000 to people who don't accept late payments. They offered me a deal, information in exchange for the debt forgiveness. Small things at first. Your schedule, your preferences, the names of people who visited. Then they wanted more. Security protocols, Elena's routine, the layout of your defenses. And the attack tonight? The bomb you're clearly carrying? That's not about debt forgiveness, Maria. That's about assassination." Maria's laugh was bitter. "They told me if I didn't finish this, my entire family would pay. My brother, my mother, my nieces and nephews. Everyone I love. So yes, Victor, I'm here to kill you. And I'm here to kill her too, the woman who made you weak enough to attack in the first place." Elena's blood ran cold. Through the gap in the panic room door, she could see Maria's attention shift, searching for her. "Elena's gone," Victor said quickly. "I sent her away the moment the attack started. It's just you and me, Maria. Let her go. This is between us." "You're lying. I saw the security feeds before I cut them. She was with you in this office." Maria's gun swung toward the panic room, and Elena saw her finger tighten on the trigger. What happened next occurred in fractions of seconds that Elena would replay in her mind for years. Victor emerged from behind the desk, firing twice in rapid succession. Maria twisted, returning fire, her shots going wide as Victor's bullets found their mark. She staggered, the detonator falling from her hand, and Elena watched in horror as it hit the ground. Victor dove for it, his fingers closing around the device a heartbeat before Maria's body collapsed. He deactivated it with shaking hands, then looked up to meet Elena's eyes through the gap in the panic room door. "It's over," he said quietly. "It's over." Elena emerged from the panic room on trembling legs, stepping carefully around Maria's still form. Victor pulled her into his arms, holding her so tightly she could barely breathe, and she felt the tremor running through him, the fear he'd been suppressing, the terror that he'd almost lost her. "I thought, when she aimed at the panic room, I thought—" His voice broke. "I'm okay. We're okay." Elena pulled back enough to cup his face, making him look at her. "You saved me. You saved us both." Marcus burst through the shattered doorway, gun drawn, his eyes taking in the scene with professional assessment. "Sir, the perimeter is secured. We have 6 attackers in custody, 8 dead, the rest retreated. Casualties on our side. 5 wounded, 2 critical but stable. Medical teams are inbound." "And Maria?" Victor's voice had returned to its usual controlled tone. "Dead, sir. I'm sorry. I know you wanted answers." "We'll get them from the survivors." Victor released Elena reluctantly, his eyes never leaving her face. "Increase security protocols. I want every employee revetted, every system checked for additional compromises. This doesn't happen again." "Yes, sir." Marcus hesitated. "Sir, there's something else. One of the attackers we captured, he's already talking, says he was hired by Thomas Volkov." Elena felt Victor go absolutely still. "Volkov, the man from the meeting. He seemed so calculated, strategic, willing to take risks." Victor's voice was cold. "He tested you at that meeting, Elena. Not to see if you were strong, to see if you were valuable enough to be worth eliminating. And when you demonstrated intelligence, when you showed you could contribute to negotiations, you became a threat to his plans." "What plans?" "Control over the Los Angeles underworld. With me gone and you gone, the power vacuum would have been massive. Volkov could have positioned himself to fill it before the other families organized a response." Victor's hands curled into fists. He used the meeting to identify his targets, used Maria to provide the intelligence, and launched the attack before we could prepare defenses. "But we survived." Elena's voice was stronger now, steadier. "He failed. He failed." Victor's smile was dangerous, predatory. "And now he's going to answer for it." The next 48 hours passed in a blur of activity. Victor coordinated with the other families, Marchetti and Chen, to present evidence of Volkov's betrayal. The response was swift and brutal. Thomas Volkov was found dead in his office 3 days later, an apparent suicide that everyone knew was execution. His organization was divided among the remaining families, the balance of power restored. Elena watched it all unfold from her new position at Victor's side. No longer a housekeeper, but a partner in every sense of the word. She attended meetings, offered perspectives, learned the intricate dance of criminal politics with a speed that surprised even her. But it was the quiet moments that mattered most. The nights when Victor would hold her close and confess his fears. The mornings when they'd wake up tangled together, grateful to have survived another day. The gradual understanding that love in this world meant choosing each other again and again, despite the constant threat of violence and betrayal. 2 weeks after the attack, Victor called a meeting of his entire organization. Elena stood beside him in the mansion's main hall, watching as soldiers, lieutenants, and trusted associates assembled. "Most of you know Elena Moore," Victor said, his voice carrying across the room. "Some of you remember her as my housekeeper. That role ended the day she became something far more important, my partner, my equal, the person I trust with my life and my empire." He turned to Elena, taking her hand. "For 20 years, I built this organization on the principle that emotion was weakness, that caring about anyone made you vulnerable. I was wrong. Loving Elena doesn't make me weak. It makes me stronger. It gives me something worth protecting beyond power or money or control. It reminds me why we do this, what we're fighting for." Victor's eyes swept across the assembled crowd. "Anyone who threatens Elena threatens me directly. Anyone who disrespects her disrespects my authority. She is not my weakness. She is my strength, and she is under the absolute protection of this organization. That is not a request. That is an order." The room erupted in acknowledgement, and Elena felt the shift. The final transformation from invisible housekeeper to Victor Caldero's acknowledged partner. It terrified her. It thrilled her. It felt impossibly right. After the meeting, Victor led her to the guest house where this had all begun, where they'd first admitted their love and chosen each other despite the impossible odds. "I have something for you," he said, reaching into his pocket. Elena's breath caught as he pulled out a small box, opened it to reveal a ring, simple, elegant, a single diamond that caught the light like a promise. "I know we've only been together for a few weeks," Victor said quietly. "I know the traditional thing would be to wait, to date properly, to build toward this gradually. But Elena, I've already wasted 3 years pretending I didn't love you. I'm done wasting time. I'm done with halfway measures and careful distances and protecting myself from feeling too much." He took her hand, and Elena felt tears streaming down her face before she'd even registered she was crying. "I love you," Victor continued. "I love your strength and your courage and the way you see through every wall I've ever built. I love that you chose me despite knowing exactly what I am, what I do, what dangers come with being part of my life. And I want to spend whatever time we have, whether that's 50 years or 50 days, loving you completely, honestly, without reservation." He went down on one knee, and Elena's hands flew to her mouth. "Elena Moore, will you marry me? Will you stand beside me, not just as my partner, but as my wife? Will you let me spend the rest of my life proving that loving you was the best decision I ever made?" "Yes," Elena whispered, then louder. "Yes. Yes, of course, yes." Victor slid the ring onto her finger, then stood and pulled her into his arms, kissing her with a desperation and joy that matched her own. When they finally broke apart, both were crying, both were laughing, both were holding each other like they'd never let go. "I'm gonna make you so happy," Victor murmured against her hair. "You already do." Elena pulled back to look at him, this complicated, dangerous, beautiful man who'd chosen her just as completely as she'd chosen him. "Victor, I spent 3 years loving you from a distance, convinced that close enough was good enough. Thank you for proving me wrong. Thank you for choosing honesty over control. Thank you for loving me. Thank you for being brave enough to knock on my heart when every instinct told you to stay invisible." Victor cupped her face, his thumbs brushing away her tears. "Thank you for seeing me, really seeing me, and choosing to stay anyway." They stayed in the guest house until dawn, talking and laughing and planning a future that weeks ago had seemed impossible. When they finally emerged, the sun was rising over the mansion grounds, painting everything in shades of gold and promise. The road ahead wouldn't be easy. Victor's world was still dangerous, still unpredictable, still full of threats and betrayals and violence. But they would face it together. No more hiding, no more distance, no more halfway measures. Elena had spent 3 years as the invisible woman who loved Victor Caldero from the shadows. Now she stood in the light, his equal and his partner, no longer afraid of being seen. And Victor, who'd spent 20 years convinced that love was weakness, had finally learned the truth, that love wasn't what made you vulnerable. Fear was. Control was. The desperate attempt to protect yourself by keeping everyone at a distance. Love. Real love, chosen love, love that demanded honesty and courage and the willingness to risk everything. That was what made you strong. Ryan found them later that morning, sitting together in the garden Elena had maintained for 3 years, their hands intertwined, their future spreading out before them like an unwritten story. "You two look disgustingly happy," he said, but his smile was genuine. "I assume the ring on Elena's finger means what I think it means?" "We're getting married," Elena confirmed, holding up her hand so the diamond caught the sunlight. Finally, Ryan shook his head, amused. "I was beginning to think I'd have to lock you both in a room until you sorted yourselves out. Congratulations, both of you." "Thank you." Victor stood, pulling Elena up with him. "And Ryan, thank you for that dinner, for forcing the issue, for caring enough about us to push when we were both too scared to be honest." Ryan's expression softened. You're my friend, Victor. Both of you are now. And friends don't let friends waste years on fear when they could be spending that time on love. Just promise me one thing. What? That you'll actually enjoy being happy. That you won't spend every moment waiting for the other shoe to drop, for the danger to return, for everything to fall apart. You've earned this. Both of you have. So let yourselves have it. Elena looked up at Victor and saw the same understanding in his eyes. That Ryan was right. That they'd spent so long preparing for disaster that they'd forgotten how to accept joy. We promise, they said together, and meant it. The wedding happened 6 weeks later, a small ceremony in the mansion gardens with only the people who mattered most. No elaborate production, no public spectacle. Just two people choosing each other in front of witnesses who'd earned the right to celebrate with them. Elena wore a simple white dress and carried roses from the garden she'd once maintained as a housekeeper. Victor wore a suit that made him look less like a crime boss and more like a man desperately in love, which was exactly what he was. When the officiant asked if they promised to love each other through whatever came, through danger and fear and the constant uncertainty of their world, they both answered without hesitation. I do. And when Victor kissed his bride, when Elena kissed her husband, the assembled crowd erupted in genuine celebration. Because this wasn't just a wedding. This was proof that even in the darkest world, even when the odds seemed impossible, love could win. That night, as they lay tangled together in the bed they now shared, Elena traced patterns on Victor's chest and thought about how far they'd come. From invisible housekeeper and untouchable crime boss to partners, equals, husband and wife. No regrets? Victor asked quietly, his fingers threading through her hair. Not a single one. Elena lifted her head to meet his eyes. You? Only that I wasted 3 years being a coward when I could have been loving you. Victor pulled her closer. But I plan to make up for lost time. We have the rest of our lives. Then I'd better get started. He kissed her then, slow and deep and full of promise, and Elena kissed him back with equal fervor. Outside, the fortress walls stood strong, guards patrolled the perimeter, and the dangerous world Victor navigated continued its complicated dance of power and survival. But inside, in the sanctuary they'd built together, there was only love, only choice, only the absolute certainty that whatever came next, they would face it together. No more halfway measures, no more hiding. Just two people who'd found each other against impossible odds and chosen to build a life on the foundation of that love. Honest, complete, and absolutely unbreakable. And in the end, that was enough. That was everything. That was the victory no enemy could take away, the strength no threat could diminish, the truth that made all the risk and danger and fear worthwhile. They had chosen each other. And in Victor Caldero's dangerous world, that choice meant more than any empire, more than any power, more than anything except the love that had made it possible. Elena Moore, now Elena Caldero, fell asleep in her husband's arms, safe and loved and exactly where she belonged. And Victor held her close, this extraordinary woman who'd knocked on the door of his heart and refused to accept anything less than complete honesty, complete commitment, complete love. They'd both been invisible for too long, she by design, he by necessity. But now they stood in the light together, seen and known and choosing each other with every breath. It was terrifying, it was dangerous, it was absolutely perfect, and it was only the beginning.